thoughtful ideas and suggestions for guests and topics.
Great events, programs, and student activities.
All the factors are useful.
Welcome to this week's segment of Dialogue Houston. I'm your host, Lawrence Payne. To our regular viewing audience, welcome. For those enjoying us for the first time here on HCC's TV, we can be found now for Dialogue Houston on Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. and again at 6 p.m., Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. As always, at the top of the hour, let me thank you for your thoughtful calls, emails, and text messages concerning previous shows we've aired here on HCC's TV Dialogue Houston, and particularly your great ideas for topics and guests to be covered on upcoming segments of Dialogue Houston. For after all, this is your community affairs, public affairs show, now proudly in its 27th season here on HCC TV. We have a great show planned for you this evening. We're going to look at some aspects of our city with a great guest from the City of Houston, Department of Neighborhoods, the Director of the Department of Neighborhoods, Takasha Francis. And in the second part, we're going to be looking at this wonderful middle of voting. We're in the middle of early voting. Early voting in the year 2020, which is different than any year of early voting probably in the history of Houston and Harris County, and maybe even in America. We are in such an interesting posture as citizens in a democracy trying to figure out how to navigate all this craziness. But it all comes back to our daily lived experiential realities in our communities, in our neighborhoods. So I really wanted to start off talking about neighborhoods. And who better to have to talk about neighborhoods than the Director of the Department of Neighborhoods for the City of Houston, for Mayor Sylvester Turner, none other than Takasha Francis. And so great to have you here. Welcome, Takasha.
Thank you so much, Mr. Payne. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we have a lot to talk about, and we're just going to jump in here. Tell us, first of all, so citizens will be clear and the audience, listening audience, viewing audience will be clear. Tell us exactly what the Department of Neighborhoods does in the City of Houston.
The Department of Neighborhoods is comprised of 4 divisions that are committed to improving the quality of life of Houstonians. And those 4 divisions are the Inspections and Public Services Division, which deals with residential code enforcement. So we're the ones who come out into the community and assess nuisances like overgrown lots, junk motor vehicles, dangerous buildings, and bandit signs in public right-of-ways. Then we have the Mayor's Assistance Office. Those are our community liaisons who work and liaise with citizens to connect them to appropriate services to help them solve problems in their communities. We also work very closely with our super neighborhoods and our civic clubs and HOAs. Then there is the Mayor's Anti-Gang Department. The Anti-Gang Department works specifically with youth and family services to not only help keep kids out of gangs, but then off the streets. But the bevy of services that are also offered there deal with the Mayor's Youth Council. And so we sponsor that program every year with representatives from our high schools so that kids can have an introduction to civic engagement as representatives from their respective districts. And they also get to work with their council members and the mayor's office. Finally, we have the Office of New Americans and Immigrant Communities. This is our office that, of course, promotes getting acclimated into our country, as well as into our city with our immigrant and refugee community, as well as providing resource matching for those communities as those needs become apparent. We also have ESL classes that we offer, and we also offer naturalization services, among other wraparound services with communities and organizations that help support this particular group of our community. So those 4 divisions make up the Department of Neighborhoods. We also have a number of services and offerings and programs that we have started. If you're interested in volunteering in the City of Houston, we also offer houstonservice.org, where we not only have an offering of volunteer activities that are available citywide. So if you're looking for something to do in terms of volunteering, you can actually go to houstonservice.org to volunteer, or if you need volunteers, houstonservice.org is the hub for you to look for the volunteers that you need. We also have Wills clinics that we have started under our A Month of Service program. We do this in partnership with several organizations throughout the City of Houston, including the NRCDC, Lone Star Legal Aid, as well as Houston Volunteer Lawyers. And we just recently started our Neighborhood Updates program, which I'm extremely excited about, which allows Houstonians to get robocalls and text messaging from the Department of Neighborhoods about extremely important events that are happening in the city of Houston. You can call 311 if you would like to enroll in the Neighborhood Updates program so that you can stay informed about what's been happening. And many of our most recent programming messages have been around our COVID-19 response, getting information out about rental assistance, testing sites, anything of any importance to the community at this time. You can receive not only by following us on Facebook and Instagram and our website, but you can also get those updates through Neighborhood Updates as well. So that's it in a nutshell with the Department of Neighborhoods.
That was a great recap in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna start off with one of the things you mentioned that is dear to my heart, because I was around when we started them, and that's super neighborhoods.
Yes.
And so tell us and explain about the wonderful concept and the idea of these wonderful super neighborhoods that really represent a geographical area around them and really is able to bring to bear a lot of the questions and discussions on issues that we need to have understood neighborhood by neighborhood, sector by sector. And it's a great concept. So tell us about the super neighborhood.
Right. Well, the Super Neighborhoods program, as you know, was formulated under former Mayor Lee P. Brown. And the whole concept of super neighborhoods is really having a bottom-up approach as opposed to a top-down approach. So it's not the city telling neighborhoods what they need. It's the neighborhoods telling the city what they need. Because as we know, every neighborhood has different needs, different perspectives, and different demographics. So the super neighborhoods concept, currently there are about 80 that are active, that have been recognized. I'm sorry, 80, I want to say 88 that have been recognized. And then we have about 50 of those that are actually active super neighborhoods. And to simplify it, super neighborhoods are every stakeholder in your immediate community. That could be your civic club, your HOA, the school district, the churches that are there. Every stakeholder in your particular area, in your neighborhood, in your community, comes together to form a super neighborhood based on those boundaries. And you then put together a plan of action working through your council member's office as well as the administration for things that you know are needed in your particular community, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's crime, whether it's neighborhoods and beautification. Those things are all important issues that we hear resoundingly from our super neighborhood organizations. So the concept is amazing. I think it's worked well for the city of Houston, and we're definitely working assiduously to get those inactive super neighborhoods activated again, because this is a conduit that we rely on, critically to determine what needs to happen in these communities as we're hearing directly from citizens themselves.
Yeah, I'm very proud of the 88 super neighborhoods that we first formed, as you mentioned, under Mayor Lee P. Brown, and really grew and developed into having a voice. That was the whole idea, for citizens to have a direct conduit, a direct voice, as you mentioned, from bottom up, not top down, right, and to be able to clearly articulate the needs of the differences of each neighborhood and community. And now we find ourselves in 2020 having some of that same discussion, with poverty being a big driver and socioeconomic realities. We understood those in a pre-George Floyd reality. We understand them better now, perhaps in a post-George Floyd reality. And the disparities and inequities that exist in certain neighborhoods and still there. Some have always been kind of seen and understood as stepchildren or the stepchild, but that's changing also. Yes. But it really is, now that we do all this great research, including the new HERE project, the Health Equities Response Team, we're able to really see in a very clear picture where some of those gaps, and that's really what they are, and how we close the gaps, what the gaps are and how we close the gaps, so we can develop a really clear and good, safe neighborhood, a beautiful place for all to call home, because that's the goal in all of this, is it not?
It is the goal, and everybody does deserve that. That's one of the things that is so special and significant about the Department of Neighborhoods, and particularly the work that we do with all communities. My line sister nicknamed us the People's Department because we literally are all things to all people. Mm-hmm. We are the first stop most of the time when people think about issues that are happening in their department. And when we look more specifically at, beautification and making sure everyone has a beautiful place to live, that's extremely important because it's been shown in different studies that blight has a debilitating effect not only on the economic disposition of a community, but it also has physical and mental effects of people having to live around a blighted community, constantly looking at trash, constantly looking at blighted buildings, constantly looking at the nuisances that our inspections and code enforcement officers are called out to inspect every day. And what is so critical about the work that we do is that in many parts of the city, much of this is managed through homeowners associations. However, you have a lot of poorer neighborhoods that don't have homeowners associations. They have civic clubs that don't have the same constructs to be able to actually and actively manage a lot of the nuisance issues that we actually see citywide. So that's what makes our work extremely important. And while we try to not only make sure that we are enforcing our city's ordinances, but that we're also pushing compliance, that we're educating, that we're teaching people to take care of their own communities, because that is key to not only what we do, but it is also key to maintaining the community so that people can truly have a beautiful place to live.
Yeah, civic clubs are still the backbone of most of these neighborhoods. Some have strong rules and procedures and caveats. Some have
Yes.
strong binding bylaws. Some have a little looser. Some enforce them a little stronger than others.
Right.
Some may seem to be from outsiders a little more prohibitive than they need to be, but that's each one make up their own. But as we go forward and we, under the mayor's great concept, Mayor Turner's wonderful concept of complete communities, the original grouping of those neighborhoods and now the new ones that have been added, it is really an attempt to equalize, if you will, and to look at across the board all of the issues that we've talked about and raised thus far in a way that we develop each one of those neighborhoods to the same standards, to the same kind of quality, to the same kind of reality. But to do that, it's like the adage of if to treat all children equally, you have to treat them differently.
Yes.
Each one of those neighborhoods have such their own unique set of factors.
Absolutely.
As you try to close those gaps and bring them up, you have to take all those little things in consideration, but some of it is historical. Some of it is deeply felt about this neighborhood and changes, et cetera. So I know that your department is so good at looking at all those elements as we try to move forward.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think a lot of times, when Mayor Turner introduced complete communities as pretty much a hallmark endeavor for his administration, looking at the fact that there were some communities in Houston which have been historically overlooked and underfunded and underprioritized. And so we now are looking at ways, not only with just the current budget within our department, but of course working with my colleague, Director Shannon Buggs, who is the director of the Mayor's Complete Communities program. We work to look at ways that we can not only reallocate, but reprioritize in particular districts, the services that we offer as a city. And it has been wonderful so far, looking at the projects that have come out of the community meetings that have occurred, as well as really hearing in a much more concentrated sense what the community is saying about what's happening in their community. And what I've also really enjoyed about this, and I'd like to see more of, if I could just take a point of personal privilege as I've sat in on some of these community meetings, is that you see a bit of the passing of the baton in some areas. And then of course, there are some other areas that are a little less resistant, but I'm seeing an emergence of younger community persons actually coming to these meetings and becoming more involved. And one of the things that we see currently in this current election cycle is you have a lot of millennials and you have a lot of Gen Xers who live in these communities that I think previously didn't feel as though they had a place in neighborhood issues, or either couldn't figure out where that place actually was. And so I think that Complete Communities has also opened up another avenue for new voices to come into the conversation about these communities, so that people can have a much more well-rounded experience, and also looking at not just generations who have laid the foundation in those communities that preserve those communities now, but the actual generations that will be there in the future to make sure those communities live on and are treated appropriately, not just by the city, but also with the occupants that live there now and will live there later.
And sometimes having those voices hear each other and more importantly, listen to each other
Yes.
becomes a challenge.
Yes.
And of course, if you add the layers of different races and social economic backgrounds, different educations, different historical experiences, different ownership factors of how they said, well, we were here first before anybody else came, and my parents lived in this neighborhood, and my grandparents lived in that house down the street,
Right.
it becomes a very interesting prospect. So
Yes.
what I understand that one of the things your department does so well is that, yes, this is Texas, so I can say y'all. Uh,
Yeah.
that your department does so well is that you take all those factors into consideration, because actually you're doing community outreach, civic engagement, diversity, cultural understanding, inclusiveness, all at the same time. While
Yes.
you're doing all this other work and trying to look at the structural things that need to be done,
Right.
community by community, neighborhood by neighborhood, all these other factors play into it so deeply.
Yes, absolutely. And I think right now our country is sitting on the precipice of an opportunity for us to not have marginal surface level conversations about the differences we have. And I think when it comes down to communities, and as we look at how communities are changing, with that conversation comes a respect for differences. But it also, should bring with it a respect for history and a respect for heritage. And so one of the things that excites me as I look at the work that we do is how we really try to make sure, as you mentioned before, that people aren't just talking, that they're listening. Our community liaisons work very much so, probably more directly than any other unit of my department in the mayor's assistance office, with our super neighborhoods and with our communities. Now, as you know, Mr. Payne, super neighborhoods are self-governing. They set up their own bylaws, they set up their own rules and structure. So we don't interfere with that, but we really try, when we're called upon, to help people understand, of course, the ultimate reason for that super neighborhood, and to try to encourage more voices to actually be in the conversation, and to also encourage more people at the table. And so you're right. I mean, there are a lot of things that are very different, and we still don't have a perfect plan for that. But what I am seeing right now, I think, is encouraging in terms of people being more open to hear what other people have to say, and also being more accepting of different ideas coming into the table. And as we already know, Houston touts, the title for being the most diverse city in the United States. And while that, of course, comes with benefits as well as issues we have to work through, I think part of us beginning to address those issues starts at our communities, because that is the microcosm of the world that we're looking at. And Houston is the microcosm of what the United States will look like very shortly, nationwide. So
Yes, and it still comes always back to community, as you said.
always.
Community is the bounds and the graces and the foundation for everything we do.
Yes.
That community, the unity in the community, all those things where we develop our relationships built on mutual trust and respect with each other.
Yes,
Nothing
sir.
happens without trust. Nothing happens without trust. And back to the super neighborhood just for one moment.
Sure.
When I was in Mayor Brown's administration, when we started super neighborhoods, his guiding principle was the same principle that he did with community policing.
Mhm.
And it was the ability to get to know each other, to know your neighbors, to know the people on your block, to know your community, to spend time with each other, to walk the streets, just like he encouraged the police officers to know their beat, to know their community, get out of your cars, and begin to know each other. And I think today that's probably needed more than ever before,
Yes.
because we're so divided, as you mentioned. We need each other more than we realize. We need each other more than we think. We've always needed each other, but that's hard. Our biggest headaches are with each other, but still we need each other.
Absolutely.
Around that, because we have to have it, because that's what community and neighborhood is all about. So let me just put on another little hat with you quickly from the time we have left. You're in the current class of the Center for Houston's Future.
Yes.
And y'all talk about all these great issues in deep detail.
Yes.
And y'all get deep into these discussions
Yeah.
that all relates back to community and neighborhood.
Yeah.
So in this ongoing connection between your daily life and your work and your professional capacity there with the city department neighborhood and your stuff you're doing through the center, where do you see those things kind of connecting together? Because I think it is a great educational moment, a teachable moment, to have people understand the work you do in the communities you work with that perhaps may be outside of their normal purview, their normal perspective, their normal lived experiential realities of their life. So it gives everybody a chance to begin to see things differently through a different set of eyes. And that's why it's so important to have these kind of classes come together.
Right. Well, actually, I'm going to take a page out of someone's book. I think his name is Larry Payne. You know him, right? I think you know him. And I think he mentioned two things that I take away and I think about actually since I've heard you say them. One of the things is there are 3 steps to truth. Truth is first ridiculed, it is then violently opposed, and then of course it is accepted as self-evident. And in order for us to get to those truths, you also said something else. I think you do remember saying this as well. Larry Payne, you know him, right? Know him well, right? But you also mentioned, previously that we have to get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah.
And so when you really start to, embrace, and I think that is where we are in our communities, I think that's where we are as a country, is figuring out how to get comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations. And so one of the reasons, or one of the things that we talked about just yesterday in our class, we, mentioned this yesterday in having a conversation, just around racial equity. And it was very enlightening. And this was one of the points that I brought up yesterday, is the only way that we can really start to get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations is to have them, and to acknowledge that they are uncomfortable conversations, and not allowing that. And this is not something new. This is what we practice in other relationships in our lives. But what I realize is that, sometimes, we don't necessarily want to confront things. And this is the essence of communication in any other relationship that you have. So this is more about taking those transferable skills, whether it's work, whether it's home, whether it's your spouse or your family, is sometimes you got to have uncomfortable conversations. And unfortunately, sometimes it has to get worse before it can get better, because that's the whole point of healing. If it doesn't cut, there's no reason to heal. And if we're staying surface level about certain things, and we're not able to get to the meat and potatoes of what's actually happening, which means we cannot transform. And so when we look at our communities and our super neighborhoods, and how well we not only work with our communities, but how well our communities work with us who offer city services, whether it's the police, fire department, Department of Neighborhoods, Public Works, any of the 23 departments and my colleagues that oversee those relationships with community are integral to everything that we do. And so when we were looking at our class yesterday, and what I hope to take from my experience with the Center for Houston's Future, I have amazing classmates. We had a very robust conversation that excites me, not only because I think we started getting beyond the surface level conversation, but I'm really looking more to what we will do after our class is over, because we all seem to have an eye towards keeping these critical conversations and networks alive beyond that, so that we can really and masterfully become change agents in the city of Houston. So that excites me. And I'm glad that I'm able to actually, work in an environment that allows me to be a change agent every day in terms of what we're able to do. So I look forward to that, and of course where we're going to go once our class is over.
All right, and I'm sure y'all will continue to do things even after the class officially ends, because that's usually what happens in the bonding process. Let me just turn attention to the few minutes we have left.
Okay.
All that we've been talking about is stressful. Yeah. It's very stressful. It was stressful pre-COVID-19. Now it is definitely more stressful. It was stressful before the George Floyd reality in which we live. It is now in the post-George Floyd reality more stressful. So attention to our mental health is an important part of what we must do to be ready, able to serve other human beings.
Yes, sir.
And my definition always as a servant leader is that I'm here to put on the face of the earth for one reason only, to serve my fellow human being. To do that, I have to take care of myself first. Therefore, I have to be selfish in taking care of myself so I can be selfless in my service to other human beings. Right. And mental health is a big part of that. And I know that the stressfulness that I hear from communities and neighborhoods and parents having to cope with being home with children and trying to educate children. I'm not a teacher, but I got to do this and I got to work. Yes. So one of the things that you're offering is a wonderful seminar workshop coming up on families coping with mental illness and mental health. Is that part of your regiment?
Now that actually, I believe that is going to be led by the Her Health Equity Response Task Force, right. Which we have partnered with, but no, that is actually specifically coming from their group. They've also had a number of mental health town halls with the faith-based community As a matter of fact, as we speak right now, Mayor Turner is actually having a press conference to talk about, the faith-based community and,
Opening
safe
up churches. Yeah.
safe ways that we can kind of resume worship. Because as you mentioned before, at this point, Mr. Payne, if we didn't come into the COVID season with issues, then you certainly have developed them.
Right.
Because of the COVID season. And if you had existing issues, they are exacerbated by this moment. And I think what we all have to realize is that, quite frankly, our country and our world, as we are dealing with this pandemic, we're all going through a collective grieving. And it's a situation when you say that it's a grieving, we realize that grieving is not limited to just losing individuals or actual people. I think we are collectively grieving our lives as we knew them prior to this interruption. And I don't know at different points, because we all handle things differently, how we are handling those things, I think, are showing up in so many different ways. The stress of parents now literally unwillingly having to homeschool children and not having appropriate guidance. The stress of teachers and administrators having to figure out how to balance the safety of children by having them in an in-house environment versus a virtual one. The stress of, us as city officials trying to understand and figure out how to still run the city, because the city can't stop running, to ensure that 2.6 Houstonians are not left without city services. The healthcare essential workers who are working in our hospitals are under the stress of having to treat individuals who have COVID and myriad other issues. So there is a collective stress and a reckoning. While we have slowed down in a lot of ways, we have actually sped up in other ways. So I'm hoping that people that are listening understand, and more particularly as an African American in our culture, we really don't push mental health to the extent that we do, that we probably need to. And I think historically that has come from a place of, our religious beliefs as well as access to actual mental health. But I do think that, if there is something going on with whomever is listening and you have access to mental health services, use them. That's what they're there for. And as you mentioned before, we can't downplay our mental health and keep going on fumes, acting as though things are okay when they're really not. This is the disservice that we do to ourselves. And they're currently, and I don't have the information right in front of me, but the Houston Health Department actually just announced about a week or two ago a helpline for individuals who, need to speak with a mental health professional. There have also been resources that have been free for those who may not have the insurance to go sit in a therapist's office or EAP benefits. There are also hotlines through Harris County that are available for people to talk with you if you need someone to talk with and talk through. And of course, our faith-based community is still there because, at this point, underneath all of those things, our faith is pivotal in this moment. So take advantage of whatever offerings your church, your faith-based institution may have available for you, but don't limit yourself to just that. That's why God made therapists and doctors.
That's right. That's all great advice and great resources to be tapped into during this period of time. And
Yes,
I think you're so right. We really have to focus on this common humanity and the need to help and support each other and to figure out the best way we can do that going forward. I cannot thank you enough for being on our, this segment of Dialogue Houston and being our guest this week.
Thank you.
Takasha Francis, the head of the Department of Neighborhood City of Houston. And I look forward to following up with you, and I also look forward to seeing what your current class of the Center for Houston's Future are going to do when y'all officially in the formal period. And, see what the follow-up is to all of this. Again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and you have a blessed afternoon.
All right, a few closing thoughts as we leave here. We know that we're in the middle of the early voting. We're going to be talking a lot about that coming up quickly here. But it is a time to really try to understand human beings in service to other human beings. And really, that's what it's about. Very rarely on Dialogue Houston, we talk about individuals or persons. We talk about human beings. The essence of human beingness, which is a higher thing to understand the assets and the things that go with being a human being. So we're going to explore that as we go forward in this pre-election period, but particularly in the period from the day after election to January 28th of the swearing in. It's going to be a very important time to look at some of these issues in depth as we try to cope in that in-between period. So we're going to get out of here. We're telling me out of time, so we look forward to you joining us in upcoming segments of Dialogue Houston. Until then, as always, be safe, be well, and peace, power, and love.